Hello, hello, BEMER. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be here with you. I have been looking forward to this moment for months, years. I mean, it feels like forever. And while, of course, I didn't imagine it would be like this, it doesn't change the fact that I think our coming together was meant to be. I love what you do. I love what you're about. After over 15 years of doing the math connected to the direct selling industry, I get it. I get all the good and I understand the unique challenges, and I am so here for it. Congrats on your successes recently, especially in these unprecedented times. Make no mistake, you are writing your story right now. Here, in this moment, your legacy as an individual and as a company as a whole is being written, and I'm so honored to be here to help you do it. My name is Kindra Hall. I am the Chief Storytelling Officer at Success Magazine, where I get to hear and share the stories of the biggest, brightest entrepreneurs, and I am the author of the Wall Street Journal bestselling book, Stories That Stick. And before we get into it, I know the title Chief Storytelling Officer is a little unusual. But the truth is, I first discovered the power of storytelling, which is what we'll be talking about here today, at a young age. I was 17 and I was in physics class. Now, you might not expect what I'm about to say from a storyteller, but physics class was hands down my favorite class. Early, every time to physics class. If I'm honest, it's not because I had any interest in science per se, but because I adored Mr. Suresig in a mostly appropriate way. He was totally bald on the top of his head, and then he had this ring of salt and pepper around the sides. And I remember going into that high school science classroom and sitting in the desks where the chair was like a hard plastic, and then the desk kind of wrapped around the side, watching Mr. Suresig write on the chalkboard and wondering how this guy could be so enthusiastic about something as awful as science. I know. Now, as you might guess, my grades did not reflect my love of physics class. Test scores were horrible. My lab notebook was even worse, and when it came to my final grade for the semester, I knew I was in trouble. But then, at the very end of the semester, we got an assignment. We were supposed to write a paper. Writing papers, I mean, I'm an author, that was something I could do. It was a 5-page paper on our favorite physics topic. Do you have a favorite physics topic? No, I mean, maybe you do. I did not. So I made one up. I chose the topic gravity. It seems sort of omnipresent. I mean, it means something different when you're 17 than it does in your late 30s, but that is beside the point. I went to the library, which, depending on your age, was this, I might need to explain, it was this magical place people used to go to gather information. I went to the library, gathered everything there was to know about gravity. I came back home the night before the paper was due, because that's always when we do our best work. And I wrote my paper about gravity. I'll break it down for you. Things go up. And then, after a while, they come back down. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple concept if you think about it, right? So at the end of the night, my paper was done, and I had exactly 4 pages. I was one whole page short. And if you remember high school writing of any kind, all that really mattered was how many pages had words on them. So you know what I did. First, I adjusted the font to make it a little bit bigger to try to have it take up more. And then I went to the spacing, like, so it was just, and then I don't know if you know about this. I was advanced for my age. I adjusted the margins, right? So I squeezed the text in until it was just a thin strip of text down the middle of the page that covered 5 pages, but I knew that Mr. Suresig wouldn't go for it. So at the very last minute, I decided to cheat. You see, in high school, I was on the speech team. Yes, I was very popular, just like all of the speech and debate kids are, and storytelling worked really well on the speech team. So I wondered if a story might work here. So I wrote a story about my love of roller coasters. Like, I love roller coasters. Like, strap me into that seat and send me off. Every summer where I grew up, the amusement park was called Valley Fair, and I would try to get there and be one of the first ones in line to get on Wild Thing. Now, Wild Thing was this big green twisted metal of a monster of a roller coaster, and you would sit in those roller coaster seats and feel the heavy bars come over your shoulders. And on Wild Thing, the first thing it did was go straight up in the air. And the second thing it did was come straight back down. Actually, no, it wasn't straight back down. The drop was so steep, it actually curled back in on itself. And that feeling you get in your stomach as it drops. My friends, that feeling is the result of gravity. So I took that story, it was about half a page long, and I put it at the front of my 4-page physics paper. And then in the middle, it had all of the data and the information and the science and the whatever about gravity. And then at the end of the paper, with that last half a page, I came back to the story. And I saved this paper. It was the only good grade I ever got in physics class. So this is the actual end of the physics paper. So the next time I get on Wild Thing and I feel the heavy bars come over my shoulders, I will look to the sky. Imagine Sir Newton and the apple that fell on his head, and I will thank him. That paper was 5 pages long, all right? So I handed it in. I was pretty sure Mr. Suresig was going to see right through this. Like, clearly, I had cheated. This was a very serious science paper, but when I got the paper back, on the front of it was a big red A. And on the back, in the comments, Mr. Suresig wrote something I will never forget. Something I want you to remember during our time here today and long after. Excellent application of information to real life stories. And I'm sure you've felt that gap from time to time before too, haven't you? Like when you share BEMER, the products, the opportunity with someone, you tell them everything there is to know, and still you can tell there's a gap, like a 1-page gap. Like they still don't fully grasp just how powerful this really is. What I am going to teach you here today is to fill that gap, not with more information, but rather with stories that will stick. We'll start by talking about why storytelling works so well, what's happening when we hear and tell a story. Then we'll discuss what a story is and what it isn't. And finally, I am going to share with you a few do's and don'ts when it comes to sharing your story. Are you excited? Hey! All right, good news. It doesn't matter if you're excited or not. I have enough excitement about storytelling for all of us, okay? So let's get started. Why does storytelling work so well? Well, it all starts with science. We often think about a story as appealing to the heart, right? It tugs on the heartstrings, but the reality is the effects of a story start in the brain. Neurologist Paul Zak wanted to put this to the test. He wanted to see if there was a change in our brain chemistry, something we can't even control when we heard a story. So to test this, he gathered a group of participants, drew their blood beforehand so he would have a control, something to compare it to, and then he played for them a short video. Now, the video told a story. It had characters to care about, which is one of the 4 key components I discuss in Stories That Stick, something a story needs to have. It was emotional. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And afterwards, he drew their blood again. And what he found was raised levels of 2 very important chemicals, cortisol and oxytocin. Now, why does this matter to you? Well, first of all, cortisol is responsible for increased focus and attention. Tell me, have you ever been talking to someone, either in a presentation or a meeting, or even just in a conversation, and you see the person looking at you, but you know they're far, far away? Right? Like, you've had that happen. In fact, it might be happening right now as you're watching this, but I want you to think for a moment, how were you listening to this presentation at the beginning when I was telling you the story of physics class? We listen differently when we're told a story because our brains release cortisol, which forces us, or at least makes us, want to pay attention, and we can't help it. And of course, oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is known as the trust hormone. This is how we increase empathy and emotion. Make no mistake, people make decisions based on what they feel first. Then they backfill that decision with logic. By telling stories, you're tapping into the power of that feeling, the feeling of what is possible with the BEMER Pro Set. If you've ever struggled with price conversations, for example, it's very possible you're skipping the story. People don't buy the thing, they buy the story of what that thing will mean in their lives. Of course, it's important to be compliant with your stories. Remember, when you're using stories, you're tapping into that release of oxytocin, and you're speaking, quite frankly, the brain's love language. Okay, one more reason why storytelling works so well, especially for the work you do. Stories are uniquely memorable, and there's a reason for that. Storytelling has a leveraging point that other forms of communication simply don't have, and that is the storytelling process is a co-creative one. As I am telling you my story, you create your own version of it in your mind. You take my words, yes, but you attach your images to it. And because you actively participate in the creation of that story, it will stick with you longer. Let me ask you, when I was telling you the story about physics class, did you picture a high school classroom of your own? You could maybe picture the desk. Maybe you could see your teacher. You could, couldn't you? I mean, I'm imagining you nodding your head right now. You didn't even know that was happening, but I did. And I know that because I shared that story with you, my message will stick with you longer. Rudyard Kipling said it best: if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. I know you aren't here to be forgotten. I mentioned your legacy earlier. This is it. Share your story. Stick with people forever. All right, I talk a lot more about the science behind the power of storytelling in my book, Stories That Stick. But for now, let's move on, because despite all of the incredible benefits that come from choosing story as your communication default, there's a problem. In its rise to buzzword status. You've heard about storytelling before, right? Before watching this right here. We've lost the understanding of what a story actually is. So I'd like to break that down a little bit for you so you don't make the mistake of thinking you're telling a story when in reality you aren't. First, what a story is not. A story is not a list of features, facts, and results. Listen, I get it. The results are incredible. The features are mind-blowing, but just listing them isn't going to get the job done. Second, a story is not incredible science. Now, hold on a second here. I want to make sure that you understand, that I understand how incredible the science is. I mean, right now in my head, I'm picturing the mind blown emoji. During my conversations, prepping for this presentation, I was like, this feels like exactly what the world needs. But just talking about the science, which you might be tempted to do if you're a science. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I didn't like physics class, but I could have listened all day to the science behind what BEMER is doing. But remember, I mentioned this just a few seconds ago, just a few minutes ago. We don't buy the science first, or the logic of the science, and talking too much about the science can make it feel really complicated. And so as you're building your business, people might think that they have to be a genius in order to participate. It's not, a story is not sharing the science. A story is sharing what the science can do for someone's life. And lastly, a story is not vague, high-level promises or industry jargon. Like when someone says, I'm so passionate about what I do, which is great. But really, saying I am so passionate is like the least passionate way of expressing your passion. Or when it comes to the business, when we talk about the business giving us financial freedom, but we just say financial freedom. I mean, what does financial freedom actually mean? For example, I was working with a woman in your industry, and her big why, you've heard about how important it is to talk about your why. We'll talk about that more later. Her big why for the business, for the opportunity, was she wanted the freedom. She wanted freedom to spend more time with her children. So I asked her, what has that looked like for you in your life? And she said, well, it's looked like more freedom to spend time with my children. I asked again, but where have you seen it? What does that feel like? When she said, you know, more freedom to be with my children. So we got to work, and with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, we found an incredible story. You see, she had a couple of children, and each year at her children's school, back when children went to school, they had what they called author day. It was a huge deal. The kids dressed up as their favorite character from a book or their favorite author. There was a big parade through the hallways of the school, and every year the mother would dress her children up. She would drop them off at school, and then she would drive 45 minutes to her office. And at about noon, she would start to get messages on her phone, and her phone would be filled with pictures of her kids at author day. Pictures other parents had taken, and it broke her heart. And at that moment, she vowed that she would never miss another author day again. She doubled down on her business. She threw herself into the opportunity. And the next year, when author day came around, she dressed her kids up. She brought them to school. And yes, at noon, her phone was filled with photos from author day. And they were photos that she had taken. Now, doesn't that feel completely different than just saying, I do this business so I can have more time with my children? That is a story. Now that you know what a story is not, I want to give you a little crash course in what a story actually is. First, a story has a 3-part framework, which, by the way, means that stories are super simple, okay? Do not overcomplicate it. Now, you probably heard as a child that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's not wrong, but it doesn't help you very much. Instead, from now on, I want you to think about those 3 parts in a story like this: normal, explosion, new normal. What was normal, what happened, explosion, and what is possible now as a result, new normal. Where most stories go wrong is they start with the explosion, the decision that was made, the thing that was happened. They start in the middle, like I got started with this great company and now, or I tried this incredible product and now. The problem is, in order for us, your audience, your prospect, your potential customer to care about all the things that are possible in the new normal as a result of the BEMER explosion, we can call it that, we have to know a little bit about what was normal, what life was before that decision. So for example, maybe you knew this guy. Look at him. He's serious, he's successful, but he doesn't look that happy. Maybe he's stressed, never gets recognized, could use some extra income, but he wasn't sure how to get it. And then he found you. And now look at him, he's super stoked. Oh, wow, he gets recognized all the time for his hard work. Maybe he earns a little extra income. And oh, he's building a whole team, a whole community of positive people. The thing is, we don't care about all of the great stuff. Heck, we probably wouldn't even believe it unless you tell us about the normal. Because where are your new people sitting? They're in their own normals. Start your story there so they can say to themselves, oh, yeah, that sounds like me, or oh, I've been there before. The second thing a real story has is 4 key components. I want to break these down for you very briefly. I talk about it a lot in my book, Stories That Stick, but you can use this as a storytelling checklist. First of all, a story needs to have identifiable characters, people we can connect to, people we can straight up identify and identify with. Second, a story needs authentic emotion. Now, here's something important to remember. It doesn't have to be big or over the top. It doesn't have to be the most exhilarating success or the most tragic failure. Authentic emotion is what we're going for here. A story needs to have a moment. It needs to occur at a specific place and time. So distill those moments out from your experience. And lastly, a story needs specific details. Let me ask you, do you remember when I mentioned the heavy bars of the roller coaster coming over my shoulder? My guess is you did. I know you did. And now you know why I included that. So make sure your stories have these 4 components and you'll be great. All right, so we've talked about what a story is, what a story isn't. Now what I'd like to do is give you some very simple, straightforward do's and don'ts for using your incredible stories. First, let's start with a do. Do hone in on a few key stories. You should have your product story. You should have your business story or your opportunity story. These are the stories that you need to know really well. Go ahead, practice them, test them out, tell them to your friends. When I was on the speech team, they would tell us to practice into a mirror, staring at a locker. That was in high school. I'm not requiring that you go find a locker, but it's really important that you have those first few stories and be able to tell them really, really well, especially if you have to tell them in short periods of time, which brings me to number 2. This is a don't. Don't skip the story virtually. I know that so much communication is happening now virtually. It's happening online. It's happening on Zoom. It's happening in social media. And what happens is, because we're just staring at a little hole on our computer screen, or we're just typing something up on social media, we have more of a tendency to revert back to the information, to think, oh, they don't have the time, or oh, they don't want to hear this. Remember, the person, I mean, think about this. I am talking to the lens of a camera right now, but you're still a person. and you still need my story. I've seen this happen a lot. Make sure you don't skip the story when you're talking virtually or talking online. Number 3, don't leave this very important story out, and that is stories about you. Don't assume that the stories you tell always have to be about BEMER, about the products, about the opportunity. Now, I know that might sound a little controversial. That's why you're here after all. That's why I was hired after all. But don't forget, this isn't just about products. This is about a lifestyle. Don't forget, you're not a salesperson. You are a leader. You are a life changer. And who's the person we want to follow? We want to follow somebody we know. We want to follow somebody we feel we can trust. Well, how do we get to know people? How do we start to trust people? The fastest, most effective way to cross that bridge is through stories. So don't leave out the stories about you. Are you an avid biker? Do you love dogs? Are you great in the kitchen? Or like me, terrible in the kitchen? Do you have a family or a passion outside of this business? Are you scatterbrained or super detail oriented? Share the stories of your whole humanness. You understand how important that is for what your product can do. Don't underestimate how important that is when it comes to your stories. Number 4, another don't. I know, it's weird. I should have thought about that more, but this is really important too. Don't assume you know their story. I see this happen a lot in this business. We don't approach that person because we assume this or that about them. We hesitate talking to this person because we assume that we already know everything about them. Make no mistake. There is no way for you to know everything about someone else's story. So keep telling yours, because you never know who needs it most. And if you just make those assumptions up front, you're missing an opportunity, and they are missing so much more. Lastly, most importantly, do tell your why story. You've heard this before, right? The importance of having and sharing your why story. But here's the thing. I'm not talking about just sharing it with others. Sure, you should do that. But the most powerful story any of us can tell are the ones we tell ourselves. It is so important to choose the stories we tell ourselves wisely. So have a why story so you can tell it to yourself. Especially here, especially now, especially in this business, in the work you do, I know there are moments of overwhelm and frustration at times where it's all about the to-do list and we forget about the for who list or the for why list. But if there's anything that the research is showing, it's that the more intimately you are connected to your own purpose, the better leader, the better you will be. And in those moments, your greatness is entirely dependent on the story you tell yourself. So I have one of those stories, one I tell myself when I need to be reminded of what it's all for. So in my family, there's me, there's my husband, Michael, and our 2 kids. My son is 9. He had a teacher named Mrs. Barton. He wanted to call her Mrs. Farton. So I've got that going. And then I have a daughter who is almost 8, and she has this wild blonde hair and these, I mean, she is a force of nature. That's what I call her. My mother calls her Karma. So there's that. And this story happened several years ago. My daughter was about 3, and my work was really just starting to ramp up. I was busy, I was stressed, and I was questioning what is this all for? Like, had I made the right choice to be away from my children, to be distracted, to pursue this passion, to take on this stress? I was traveling a lot. Was I wrong to leave them? You know, the typical mom or parent guilt. And one day we were at home. We were in her bedroom on the floor, and I was with my daughter, and we were building something with blocks. And I was distracted with work, with everything, questioning myself. And she looked at me and she said, "Mama, we are building a castle." Oh, right, okay. Now, there are some architectural issues with the castle that we can fix that. And then she looked at me again and said, "And we live in this castle, Mama, because we are two princesses." Which, to be seen as a princess by your daughter, I mean, I don't know if there's anything better. But she didn't stop there. Her eyes narrowed just like this a little bit, and there was this serious look on her freckled face, and she said, "And it's a big castle, Mama, because we are two princesses who go to work." And in that moment, I saw in my daughter's eyes a story that maybe me following my dream was teaching her to dream bigger. And that is a story I will tell myself forever. So what stories, what moments along your journey can you use to tell yourself when you need it most? All right, BEMER, my friends. Wow. We've been through a lot together. You now know why storytelling works so well, or at least a little bit about what a story is and what it isn't, and a few do's and don'ts when it comes to storytelling in your BEMER business. The world needs what you have. The world needs your story now more than ever. Never doubt that. Never doubt the power your story can have to change the world, one person at a time. I hope this is just the beginning for us. You can find me on social media at Kindra Hall on Instagram, Kindra Hall Fan on Facebook. You can also find me at Success. And my hope is that the next time the stakes are highest and you can feel the pressure coming over you like the heavy bars of a roller coaster, you can sense that one-page gap, I hope you look to the sky. You imagine our time here together and you choose to tell your story. Thank you so much for the honor of being here with you today. I can't wait to hear the stories you'll tell.